Have you ever made a promise to God? Well, I did. I made a promise to God I'd never have to keep. At least that's what I thought. And it changed my life forever. Let me tell you the story. John, who's now my husband, was basically a fixture at our house. He would have dinner at the house, and then afterwards, he would jam with my father playing music for hours until one of them finally gave up. Then one evening, he asked if I'd walk him out to his truck. That was an odd request. Now, I was used to his non-stop usual chatter about the future. He loved talking about his future, which I always politely listened to. But tonight, his mood was different, and I couldn't put my finger on it. When we got to the truck, he kept chatting. Seemed like he was talking about what he thought about his future, about God, his faith, his job, and how important family was to him. And that one day he'd get married. Okay, I thought. Made sense. Then he said, "So what do you think?" I was so checked out, I just blinked and said, "Think about what?" And that's when he hit me with, "Think about us getting married." I never saw that coming. Never in my wildest dreams. He was years older than me. He already graduated college. He had a real job. I was 17 and just trying to graduate. And we were just good friends. I loved our friendship. So I thought, and he was telling me that God had confirmed I was the one. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, how did this happen? When did he fall in love with me? This is news to me. How did I miss this? I needed Hail Mary, and I needed it fast, so I hit him with the family tradition. When one of the daughters were asked to be married, the person would go ahead and invite both my parents to a very fancy dinner. And during the dinner, that's when you ask my father to see if you could marry me. I was so sure my dad would say no. And in that moment, I made a rash promise to God. Listen, I was in shock. I never saw this coming. So I promised God, you know what? If my father says that I'm supposed to marry him, then I'll marry John. It was a vow I made in bad faith. It was a spiritual loophole I was convinced I'd never have to use. It was easy to promise God something when I knew what the ending was going to already be in my favor. This wasn't a this was a safe bet. The night of dinner, it came, and John was a complete disaster, a nervous wreck. He's usually the calmest man in the room, but that night, his steady assurance was gone. I could go on, but me, I was calm as a cucumber. I was fine because freedom was just one answer of no away. I just sat back waiting for my dad to say no. And there John went and finally asked. And my dad just sat back and laughed. And then he said, "I thought you were just going to ask to take her out on a date." He then started telling stories about my sister's husbands and the way they asked. I was starting to get antsy. "Just say no, Dad," is all I kept thinking in my head, and the suspense was killing me and John. My dad finally looked at me and tilted his head and asked if I was actually only 17. And for the first time in my teenage life, I wanted to look younger than I ever did. I whispered my age, 17, Dad, and pointed out John's age. He's 5.5 years older than me, but then it seemed a lot bigger. Hoping that sealed the deal, My father sat silently, eyeing us both, and he looked John in the eye and said, "Yes, you can marry her. Meet me tomorrow at my house with your tax returns and check stubs." My world stopped. The whole ride home, John and my parents were ecstatic and talking about how soon the marriage would be and just what life would be like. And I was completely miserable and nobody noticed. My mind was screaming, what about the promise? How do I get out of this? And now it was time for John to be walked out to his truck because we returned home. And the struggle was real. I wanted to turn him down. I wanted to apologize. I wanted to stay friends. But that rash, desperate promise to God just hung in the air. And John was waiting for an answer. I looked at John in the eye and took a deep breath. Yes, John whooped around, jumping around and shouting, and probably woke up half the neighborhood. He was the happiest man on earth that night, and I felt absolutely terrible. I still only had friends' feelings for him. And it was obvious he had more than that for me. My prayer changed. Please, God, please have my heart change for John. The wedding was planned for 9 months out, after I graduated high school, after I had turned 18. And by month 6, my prayers were increasing to God to please have something happen. Please. Because I could tell John was getting more and more attached. And I kept telling God how unfair this was. And then one day, my mom asked if John could take my sister and I to the market and pick up a few things. And as we were parking at the market, a man in filthy clothes who was homeless, it looked like, walked up to the window and asked John for money. John gave us the keys to his truck and told us to go on and go shopping. We watched John curiously as he walked the man to the nearby McDonald's. We didn't know what he was going to do. I've never seen anybody do this. And when we came back out of the grocery store, there was John sitting right there on the curb with the man, just chatting away. The man was eating and John was drinking a soda. And in that moment, something incredible happened. I saw John for the first time with new eyes. I saw a handsome man. Yes, but more importantly, I saw a huge, truly loving and giving heart. I, who was determined to walk a life alone, realized I could love this man. It was a literal supernatural makeover in my heart. My love for John grew daily as I recognized his God-given character and his heart for the Lord. Now, my story isn't about how I married John, my best friend. No, it's about what happens when you try to bargain with God. You try to manipulate a situation, and God, in his great patience, not only honored my stupid rash promise, but used it to give me exactly what I needed, a blessing I didn't know I needed. You know, you don't have to be perfect for God to work in your life. You just have to surrender your flawed plan and trust his. For years after, I met many people who have made similar bargains to God. You know the ones. God, if you just get me out of this situation right now, I swear I'll never do this thing again. When a crisis hits and we try to write a contract with the divine, it's a natural human reaction, especially when you're young and desperate. And the data I looked at confirmed it, including over half the people I asked. admitted they had made hasty promises to God, most of them before the age of 25. My theology when I was young was immature, and my heart was operating out of desperation to escape marriage. And God knew that. And the beautiful truth is, my salvation and my life's blessings don't depend on my flawless promises. They depend on my surrender. I truly believe God honored my foolish promise, not to punish me, but because he had a bigger plan I couldn't see. He answered my final desperate prayer to help me fall in love with John. He saw the gift I couldn't recognize. And the whole event taught me to take seriously the warning of Scripture about making rash vows. It's always better to make your yes be yes and your no be no. Today, John and I have been married 45 blessed years. What started out as a disastrous, manipulative promise became the single greatest gift in my life. God didn't want a contract. He wanted me to trust him. So, what is that rash, desperate promise you've made to God or to yourself that ended up teaching you the biggest lesson? Remember, because he lives, it does change everything.